The Nothing Ear 2. I even put on my good shirt for this one, the one with the collar. This is basically form, function, tug of war. Sometimes form wins and sometimes function kind of tries to win. For example, the case. This is clearly a display case, make no mistake, and it looks gorgeous, but did the earbuds really have to be that far apart? I mean, the case is a bit of a chungus and clearly form won out over function. 2 points to the design team. But the earbuds themselves are shaped after the AirPods Pro, and that's a good thing because that means it's comfortable and ergonomic, and I can vouch for that. Now, just like the AirPods Pro, this also works on squeeze controls, and you've got a little notch on the stem for this, but the notch is a little bit hard to distinguish and discern just by feel alone. So I feel like you can end up squeezing the wrong part of the stem, unlike the AirPods Pro or its competitor, the Soundcore Liverty 4, where it's a lot easier to find. Another thing I did notice though was that sometimes it would mistake a long squeeze for a single squeeze. It ended up playing or pausing my music when what I really wanted to do was switch to transparency mode because someone was trying to talk to me. Now, this could have been just my device, but it did happen on more than one occasion. Also, I did notice that while in the ear, at least for my ears, it slipped out ever so slightly now and then. It never fell out, but the seal of the ear canal was broken. So it's a good idea to just make sure it's in there, because there's two things that happen as a result of that. Number one is you lose bass response. That's okay. You'll see why later in this video. There's so much bass, it doesn't even matter. However, you also lose active noise cancellation performance, and that is not okay. Again, we'll be exploring that in depth later in the video. Now, there's no denying that the Nothing Ear 2 is an experience, from the display case to the design language to all those unique little sounds it makes like no other Bluetooth device. Although having a little insect chirp in your ear it's a choice. Now, all that experience is well and good, but it must be backed with functionality, an app that works, and a lot of features that also work. So let's talk about it. First, the app. Now, fun little design feature here as well. As soon as you open the app, the earbuds are presented to you front and center, taking up a lot of the screen. And the first thing I wanted to do was poke at it. And sure enough, when you do, it takes you to the control customization menu. And that's really cool. There is another way to get in here. This literally says controls, but they thought to do that knowing full well that you were going to tap the earbuds. One of those design thinking features that made Apple and companies like Brown what they are today. So that's very cool. Now, on the subject of customizability, there are 4 squeeze controls, and while they can be customized, but there's only a certain set of things you can assign to each control, the fact that there are 4 different squeezes means, for me at least, there was plenty of control from the earbuds themselves without me ever having to go into the menu. But it does come with a whole bunch of other features. It comes with active noise cancellation, transparency, customizable EQ, and a bunch of things we'll cover in the sound quality section. But it also comes with multi-point for up to 2 devices of any ecosystem. Although any less than 2 devices would not really be multi-point, would it? Still, it works as promised. Seamless switching between the devices, although I wasn't able to pull connections from one device to the other, which is something certain competitors do give and I find to be quite useful sometimes. Now, it also comes with a low lag mode. This I actually tested, and I found the lag without the low lag mode to be approximately 430 milliseconds, which is not great. With the low latency mode on, it dropped down quite a bit to 260 milliseconds, which is also not great. Honestly, that's quite average at best. And just to confirm this, I tested the Sony WF-1000 XM4 on the same test, and I made sure the Sony was running with LDAC on at its highest bitrate, which means the worst possible latency that you can get out of the XM4. And it still did better. Not just a little bit better. It clocked in at about 160 to 170 milliseconds, which is at least, what, 30%, 35% faster? Okay, they literally just pushed a firmware update, and I'll leave the number down below, and as of this update, they've reduced the latency. But it's about 260 to 270 milliseconds by default, and with low lag mode, it doesn't really improve it much, just by maybe 10 or 20 milliseconds. So it's still not great, but I just wanted to update you guys. Stop pushing firmware updates. Just give us the fine. That was on LDAC while the Nothing was running on AAC, because yeah, the Nothing does not support LDAC, nor does it support any aptX codec. It does support LHDC, but given that it's not quite as widely adopted on cell phones, I think most people are going to be using it in AAC mode. Still, really bad latency will affect your video performance, and that combined with the lack of codec support makes me think that maybe Nothing was trying to cheap out on the chipset here. They still charge you $150 for the pleasure though, so That design team is working hard. Now there's also a little find my earbud function, but it's not like the Apple AirPods Pro version. It's just the play a loud sound through the missing earbud variety. Still, it's useful, it's loud. Just make sure it's not in your ears while you're actually doing it. Now all that's well and good, but the fact is these are earbuds and we need to talk about sound. So let's start with active noise cancellation. Look, here's a reference signal and here's the performance of the Nothing Ear 2. What you're looking for is basically lower is better. The lower the Nothing Ear 2's squiggly line is, the more noise reduction there is. And it's actually quite good in the bass region over here, but it's not that great in the mids and the highs. And the reason I say it's not that great is because here's the LinkBuds S from Sony, which is about the same price. You can see it's more or less lower at almost all frequencies except that bass frequency. Now here's the One More Comfort Buds Mini, which is $50 cheaper. And here's the Soundpeats Mini Pro HS. Or how about this one, the JBL Tune 230 NC, or you get the idea. They're all lower at equal prices and lower prices. The competition is fierce and noise cancelling has come a long way. But what about transparency? Well, here's the same reference line, but this time what we're looking for is exact reproduction of that reference line, because that would mean it is reproducing the outside sound one-to-one in your ear, unchanged. And the AirPods Pro and the Bose QC2 are phenomenal at this. These, not so much. This makes the world feel like it basically doesn't have bass. Either ways, transparency is more like just an ambient sound mode. Does the job, no complaints here, but it's not the best in the business by far. You can compare noise cancelling measurements yourself. I actually put them up on this website here. And also while you're doing that, hit that subscribe button. Thank you. So if active noise cancellation and transparency mode are merely okay at best, what about the sound quality? Alright, we're gonna nerd out a bit because we're gonna delve into the sound quality of the Nothing Ear 2. I'm going to explore every facet of it and I'm going to show you exactly how you can get the best possible sound out of it. We'll start with what comes out of the box. This is the frequency response of the Nothing Ear 2. Now, if you haven't seen this, that's okay. Let me explain. There's bass, mids, and treble. And basically you have a squiggly line. If the squiggly line is pushed up in a certain frequency range like it is on this side over here, then that just means that those frequencies are boosted. So you can see this is the bass region, quite a bit of a boost, but nothing is actually following some good practices here in the industry because that bass boost is curtailed at this 200 Hz point. And what that does is make sure that the bass is tight and controlled and doesn't bleed into the mids, doesn't make vocals and other instruments sound muddy or unclear. This is a good thing. And then we've got this really big slope between 200 and 800 Hz, which it's a flavor, it's somewhat Harmon, I suppose. And then we've got the pinna gain. Now here's the thing, this ends up being a super fun sound. Like if you're a bass head, I cannot recommend this enough. This is super fun, although I do think they push the bass a little bit too far. And as for the treble as well, it can sometimes end up being a little bit harsh and brittle, so it could be better, but for a fun sound signature, this is pretty good. However, everything sounds a little bit more boxy, everything sounds a little bit more compressed. It sounds a bit forced. I think we can do better. The question is how? Well, they have a custom EQ to help us with exactly that. Now, before we get into custom EQ, it's important to know what we're trying to do here. And the way I see it, this is what I'm trying to achieve. This little slope here between 200 and 800 Hz, that's too much. I'm trying to even that out, make it a little more even, and that should open up the sound, that should clean up the mid. I want to leave everything above here as is because I think it's pretty okay. Maybe just curtail it a little bit. So let's try that. First thing is we reduce the bass. -3 usually does it pretty well. It's a good compromise between reduced bass so the drivers aren't pushed so forward so the bass doesn't become fuzzy or uncontrolled, but it's still a lot of bass even so. Then you come to the mids and you know what? There's a bigger question here. What are mids anyway? The way I see it and the way a lot of people see it, the human hearing goes from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. And the part that we are most sensitive to is between sort of 500 Hz and 5 kHz. Everything you hear, babies crying, people asking for help, all of that happens in that frequency range. So we've evolved these things over here, they amplify sound in approximately that range, usually between 1 and 4 kHz really. But that is what we call mids because that is the most important sound to us. Anything below that goes towards bass, anything above that goes towards treble. But of course, that is not how Nothing defines it. The mid slider you see there only changes everything around sort of 800-900 Hz up to a maximum of 2 kHz. So in a weird twist, if you bring the mids down, it actually increases vocal clarity. It's just because they've defined it differently. So I would bring the mids down by about 0.2. That way, this downslope that we saw on the original frequency response becomes a little bit more even, just a bit more even. Next is the treble. At this point, I felt personally the treble was a bit too much on certain songs, so I just reduced it by -2, and that seemed to solve the issue. So that's what I'm going with. And I'll be honest with you, at this point, what I've just told you, bass at -3, mids at -2, treble at -2 will pretty much get you 90-95% of the way there. This is a far better sound signature in my opinion. It's still a lot of fun, but it's just open, not as compressed, and a little more towards neutral with a bit of fun. So I think that's just more suitable to more genres of music. And at this point, if you want to jump straight to the end, I wouldn't blame you. I'll put a timestamp here as well, no problem. But if you do want to delve deeper, if you want to get that last 10%, then we're going to have to go into personalized EQ territory, which is probably one of the best implementations of personalized EQ I have ever seen, but also it's the weirdest. Let me explain. So personalized EQ is nothing's way of testing for your hearing loss. When you start it, it asks for your birth year, which I thought was odd. If you're testing for my hearing loss, how does it matter when I was born? You're testing everything anyway. But what it does after that is it plays some static and then tones of different frequencies at different intensities, and then it asks you what you can and cannot hear. And then it compensates for that. What I found was it only tested between 1 and 10 kilohertz, which is odd because hearing loss with age usually happens well beyond 10 kilohertz. So I think they're only testing for acute hearing loss, the kind of hearing loss that you could have if you were, say, exposed to some industrial sounds or worked in a nightclub, for example. And then it depends on you being honest about your birth year to actually compensate for high and low frequency hearing loss. Nonetheless, I decided to put it to the test, really get into it. So I made two different profiles, one with a birth year of 1942 because old age and hearing loss and war, and another with a birth year of 2013 because young people, no hearing loss, but also TikTok. World War, TikTok. Either way, it's two generations that were. When you do the personalized EQ, you can stack it on top of custom EQ or balanced EQ, it's up to you. But when you do, you have to choose between 3 levels: soft, recommended, and rich, because life wasn't complicated enough as it was. Once you pick a profile, you've also got to pick an intensity level, 100 different intensity levels between 3 different profiles. That's 300 different possibilities. Why? Just regardless of your birth year, soft and rich and recommended make no difference. Here's the frequency response of soft, and here it is with rich. At any intensity level, there is literally no difference between the two, so I don't even know why they're there. At least as of this firmware update, this makes no difference. That's just one less thing for us to do, so pick one, doesn't matter. Then we come to intensity levels. Okay, I found that intensity basically increases or decreases the bass and treble tilt. This increase or decrease was a smaller amount for the 2013 profile. So if you're a younger person, it does make some change, just not that much. But for an older person, for a much older person, thank you. For a much older person, it makes a huge difference. So I wanted to know if there was some kind of consistent result I could get to most of the viewers of this channel. So I picked another profile and did everything again for a birth year of 1969. Nice. And I found the results to be actually quite comparable with that of a young person. So apparently up to the age of 50, 55, even 60, the differences are not too much. So what it comes down to is, my recommendation for you is go to custom EQ, drop the bass by 3, drop the mids by 2 and the treble by 2. Then do the personalized EQ, be honest about your birth year, it clearly doesn't make too much of a difference, and then pick a profile. Soft, rich, recommended, literally makes no difference. Pick an intensity of 30% and you'll end up with a frequency response that looks like this. Compare that with the stock response and you can see that we've kind of achieved what we set out to achieve. We've curtailed the bass a little bit, making it a little more controlled, a little cleaner, and we've managed to even out those mids without pushing the treble too far up. I kind of like that. I think this is a nicer, more balanced, more open sounding device after this custom EQ. Oh, and by the way, if you like this sort of content, then consider becoming a YouTube member. It'll help the channel. You'll get giveaways. Just saying. I'll see you there. Overall, I think the implementation and the intention is good. I think they could have just tested for higher frequency hearing loss as well, but maybe there are some other engineering challenges, real world challenges with that. I also don't get why they have 3 3 different profiles. Maybe in a future firmware update, they will add more functionality, but that'll only serve to make it more complicated. And I think for the end user, this is a slightly complicated way to do things. It needs to be simpler, especially when their other design language focuses on simplicity. So this is the Nothing Ear 2 in the middle of traffic. Got a lot of cars going around. What do you think? Are you hearing a lot of artifacting? Because I think there's a fair bit of artifacting here, and it can get a little sharp for the person on the other side. While you're listening for that, let me tell you about battery life, because you know what, I'm just going to put the numbers out here. It's nothing spectacular. It's not bad either. It's fine. But that still doesn't answer the question, is the Nothing Ear overall worth your money or not? Well, let's look at the facts, shall we? This is a beautifully designed pair of earbuds, and it's an experience like none other. Given that we're all visual people, that's going to go a long way for a lot of people, and honestly, I felt great using these as well. It's just a treat. The sound signature is definitely more on the fun side, but that's going to appeal to a lot of people as well, and you can get better sound out of it if you use that custom EQ with a little personalized EQ thrown in. But on the flip side, the latency is quite a bit, and when you're watching video, that's going to be quite noticeable, even in low lag mode. Transparency mode is nothing special, but active noise cancellation is definitely nothing special. It does not hold up to the competition in the same price category or lower. And finally, microphone quality I'd say is okay in a quiet room, but the moment there's some external noise like a busy cafe, then well, there's a lot of artifacting, and I find that sounds quite harsh to the person on the other end of the call. Basically, I think the Nothing Ear 2 is quite fun, but it's being hard carried by its design. Now, that might be good for you, but if you want to make an informed decision, you should find out about some of the competitors. Like for example, for microphone quality alone, there's this video here where I went to the FIFA World Cup and tested them out during the game. Or there's this other video where not one but two of me actually pit the Sony LinkBuds S versus the Samsung Galaxy Buds 2 Pro. I'll see you in one of those videos after you've hit the subscribe button, of course.